Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. Actually, I'm very thankful for the organizers for accommodating my request to distribute these two images, because I thought they relate very directly to the title of the panel. And I also believe the title of the panel is really very telling and captures the essence of what we are trying to do. What remains of the battle between equality and freedom? Actually, what remains is a lot. It's a huge legacy of trying to perpetuate certain concepts, values, dynamics, structures, mechanisms, past, and transcend them to the present. Now, just in the 2 minutes I have, which is very short time, if you look at these two images, this is exactly reflects what I'm trying to explain here. Of course, this is the first image is the very famous photo of Lord Kitchener, the war minister in Britain during World War I. And actually, this particular photo is labeled as the photo that sent millions of youth to war, to death. And actually, if you look at him, this is a figure, as we were trying or mentioned yesterday, how different images, experiences conjure up different memories. So this also conjures up a lot of memories for many people. This is a figure that transcends history and geography. Exactly like neoliberalism, and exactly like the phenomenon, the issues of, or the dichotomy of equality and freedom that we are trying to address. In what sense? This is a man, of course, highly decorated, war hero, but at the same time, on the other hand, he is the inventor of scorched earth policy, and also the inventor of concentration camps. So, and as I mentioned earlier, he is described as colonial administrator. Now, if you look at, just put this aside and look at this image here, how the man has been, or Lord Kitchener has been resurrected under similar banners and logos or slogans of nationalism, patriotism, your country need you to recycle. This is a waste management company in Britain that reflects, of course, exactly the essence of neoliberalism. The idea of capitalist, of course, capitalist mentality backed by military prowess and military power, and also that operates under the guise of nationalism and patriotism. What are the recycling nowadays? Of course, poverty. If you look at the financial meltdown of 2008, and who is still bearing the brunt of the financial meltdown, countries like Greece, Spain, and other countries, while now if you look at the unemployment rate of the United States of America under Trump administration, it's 4.5. Elsewhere, 13, 15, and 20%. This is the waste management. This is the recycling of neoliberalism. This is just the first part of my comment, and I think it captures a lot of, to a large extent, what we are trying to explain here, and then also what we're trying to overcome. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Emad. Let's keep it going, flowing now, and let's invite Eduardo Barcesat. Please address us, sir, for a couple of minutes.
Buenos días, amigos. Es un privilegio haber escuchado estas exposiciones. Se habla de igualdad, se habla de justicia, se menciona la libertad, pero no escuché la palabra fraternidad. Es otro de los valores que debemos recoger para este examen. Y creo que tenemos que partir desde lo que dijo el moderador. Hay una enormidad de recursos y riquezas naturales. Sin embargo, la pobreza es creciente, es geométricamente creciente. ¿Qué es lo que falla? Es lo que tampoco escuchamos mencionar. Lo que falla es el régimen de propiedad. La propiedad pública no tiene regulación jurídica alguna. Prácticamente es una orfandad normativa. En tanto que sobre la otra mano la propiedad privada tiene un gigantesco aparato de relojería contractual que regula con toda precisión cómo se adquiere, cómo se transmite. ¿Por qué no pensamos en estos enunciados de los pactos internacionales de derechos humanos que dicen que el conjunto de los recursos y riquezas naturales son de titularidad de los pueblos, no de los estados, no de los gobiernos, sino de los pueblos. Pero esa titularidad jurídica, puesta en las normas más altas del derecho internacional de los derechos humanos, no tienen correlato en las legislaciones internas. No hay ninguna norma que proteja los recursos y riquezas naturales, que asegure una justa distribución. Anoche en la conferencia inaugural se habló de la igualdad y pareciera que la igualdad se agota en el concepto jurídico. Otros mencionaron la igualdad en las condiciones de existencia social. Yo quiero hablar de la igualdad desde el derecho y me voy a ir un poco atrás. Hace 2500 años, Aristóteles sostuvo en la política que un régimen igual para los que están en situación real desigual profundiza la desigualdad. Es decir, que el derecho debe ser desigual para poder incorporar a aquellos que están marginados de la existencia digna que está prevista en los códigos y en los protocolos de derechos humanos. Creo que esto es importante ponerlo de relieve. Tenemos los países emergentes quizás la mayor enormidad de recursos y riquezas naturales, pero no tenemos la propiedad de los mismos, no puede beneficiar a nuestros pueblos. Hay discriminación, hay segregación, hay pobreza y no puede haber ninguna igualdad en aquellos lugares donde la gente no puede comer, no tiene vivienda, no tiene agua potable. Esto es elemental, pero para poder abordar esto necesariamente tenemos que tocar el tema tabú y prohibido, la propiedad de los recursos y riquezas naturales. Se habla, y muy bien, de que el tema de los derechos humanos es la comprensión del otro. Derechos humanos no es solamente lo que reclamo para mí, sino lo que tengo que reconocer en el otro a pesar de la desigualdad. Esta noción para el conflicto árabe-israelí tiene que ser fundamental. Lo que pretendo para mí, antes tengo que reconocerlo en el otro. El problema de la identidad de la patria y el derecho de autodeterminación que acá se ha desarrollado, sí, es correcto. La libre determinación es un valor fundamental. Karel Basak decía, el derecho de autodeterminación es a los pueblos lo que el derecho a la vida es a los individuos. Bueno, y en cuanto al racismo y a la explotación colonialista y a la constitución nueva que nos han hablado, creo que debemos sostener que la constitución, para que sirva, tiene que ser obra de todo el pueblo y que sea vivida como socialmente obligatoria para todos. Vaya desafíos que tenemos, vaya en esto también nuestra cuota de optimismo, de decir, se puede abordar, se puede resolver. Es cuestión de apartarnos de los caminos trillados, de los sistemas agotados y poder comprender que un mundo mejor, que haga realidad aquellos postulados de un ser humano libre respecto del temor y libre respecto de la miseria, es posible. Esa es nuestra misión. Gracias.
All right, wonderful. Let's get these two gentlemen talking now, because I think you've both raised some issues which, to my mind, seem quite interconnected. The theme of waste management, which you raised, Emad, and the theme of public property were basically, and the international treaties to govern that. I think we're talking about the same thing from different perspectives, aren't we?
Yes, in essence, of course, we're talking about a whole system of very well integrated structures of concepts, values, dynamics that actually perpetuating certain modes and relations of production and perpetuating this state of inequality. Now, just to enlarge the discussion a little bit or broaden the discussion a little bit, because here we talked about legal equality, which is an excellent, of course, idea to tackle, and also the speakers, when they talked in their very rich presentations, they raised a lot of concerns about actually what the term that was used in Mexico, for example, and of course in South Africa, and Rachel also raised it with the friend who said we are waging a common battle. The word was battle, even though I prefer to use a less combative word, which is shared or common welfare, our common welfare. I think this is a more optimistic way of looking at things, because this is another concept that was used, the idea of common optimism. Yes, it's very good, but it all revolves around the issue of shared knowledge as well. So there are so many things that we need in terms of steps, not only to point to the areas where inequality exists, because I think, as we have seen through the presentations, almost they exist in economic, in socioeconomic, in terms of even IT and digital technology, in racism, in issue of citizenship, bigotry and hatred. All these are manifestations of inequality, and of course, lessens and reduces the amount of freedom that the human being can exercise. So what we need to do, in addition to pinpointing these issues and these problems, also is just to look to the way forward. What can we do beyond knowledge sharing in order to affect the existing structures? And again, to touch the elephant, the big elephant in the room, what are we going, or how do we want to deal with neoliberalism? Are we seeking an alternative to neoliberal policies? As its proponents, for example, admittedly, they say there is no alternative whatsoever. Nobody can bring an alternative. So how can we engage in this and at least at the micro level build baby steps until we can find some kind of, or push some of the pitfalls of neoliberalism and promote more equitable relations and dynamics?
Bueno, ninguna duda que compartimos la descripción o el análisis de la realidad en cuanto a la desigualdad. Eso no nos suscita debate. El tema es, y ya que citaron acá a Alicia en El País de las Maravillas, cuando Alicia le pregunta al gran gato, ¿y de acá cómo se sale? Y el gran gato le dice, y eso depende de dónde quieras ir. Bueno, doy por sentado que queremos un mundo más libre, más igualitario y más fraterno. Pero para ello tenemos que modificar las estructuras de la desigualdad real. Es decir, no podemos abordar ningún pensamiento que mejore la existencia social si no admitimos de que debemos ingresar al tema de la estructura de la desigualdad y posibilitar que una mejor distribución de la riqueza lleve a esas condiciones de libertad, igualdad y fraternidad. Pero ahí está el otro tema muy importante que usted ha señalado, que son, yo diría, los obstáculos epistemológicos, las incrustaciones que tiene el modelo, es decir, el pensamiento hegemónico neoliberal, que nos pretende decir no hay otra alternativa, no interesa de qué color sean, lo único que pueden hacer es administrar este modelo. Estoy parafraseando las palabras de Francis Fukuyama, uno de los ideólogos mayores quizás. Bueno, este sistema conduce a esta desigualdad creciente, entonces no nos sirve. Tenemos que desafiarlo, y tenemos que desafiarlo, creo, con la única filosofía política y social que ha dado el siglo XX, que es la de los derechos humanos, pero con honestidad. Es decir, derechos humanos no es solamente no matar al otro de un balazo, es también no matarlo de hambre, de condiciones indignas de vida. Y para esta política creo que tenemos que utilizar los instrumentos jurídicos mayores. Figuran como una especie de frontispicio en los sistemas legales, pero no tenemos ninguna instrumentalidad para llevar adelante esa idea de recursos y riquezas naturales son de los pueblos, la distribución debe ser decidida por los pueblos y tenemos que romper la dominación de la deuda externa, de la fuga de capitales de los países del tercer mundo y recuperar nuestra capacidad de decisión y nuestro desarrollo tecnológico. Este es el desafío que tenemos por delante.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for Eduardo and Emad Shahin. That has been very enriching. I've certainly got a list of questions here. I'm sure you have. I would like to get us going with our next part, which is the open debate. So if you have a question, could I kindly ask the following? Could we please keep our questions to a question and try and keep it short and brief? And could we start by introducing yourself, your professional affiliation, and to whom the question is addressed? We have an exciting panel here of speakers and commentators. So once again, we'd appreciate it if we can keep our questions brief, short, and focused on an actual question. If you have a question, please raise your hand. I will call you out, and you have a microphone in front. Okay, we have. Let's start with the gentleman here, and then and then we will take a question from Mr. Celso. Go ahead, sir.
Well, what Eduardo Barcesat have spoken now, there is an example of that. Alaska, in the early 80s, in the late 60s, Alaska discovered a huge amount of oil reserves. The governor of Alaska told his people, 300,000 inhabitants, we need to think not only in our generation, but in the future generation. Let us separate at least 25% of the royalties coming out from the natural resources, exploitation of natural resources such as oil, and build a fund that will pertain to all. And he wanted everybody to vote on that. Debate and vote. 76,000 people said yes, 38,000 said no. And so the 25% of the royalties, for some years, 50% were started to be invested in the Alaska Permanent Fund, in U.S. stocks of Alaskan companies, U.S. stocks, international stocks, including from almost all our nations, and real estate investments. The Alaska Permanent Fund evolved from $1 billion in the early 80s to $60 billion today. Suppose Eduardo Barcesat was a citizen of Alaska, just only condition, living there for a year or more. Since the early 80s, you would be receiving each year 300, 400, 500. In 2008, when the price of oil went very high, it was $3,269 per capita. Father, mother, and 3 children, $1,600. What happened? Alaska, 1980, the most unequal of the 50 American states. Today, with Utah, Alaska and Utah are the most equal of the 50 American states. It is considered political suicide for any leadership, and even for Sarah Palin, the Tea Party leader, to be against this system. Everybody considers very positive. It's an example for the world.
Right, so the question is whether this could be a model for other areas. Is that what we're suggesting?
Several books explaining that Alaska should be the example for the world.
All right, who would like to have a go at that? Let me invite members of the panelists here and the commentators. Who would like to? Eduardo? Since the example involved your name, you were given as an example of a citizen of Alaska who's enjoying this $3,200.
Muy sencillamente que la clave está en que el pueblo participó en la toma de decisiones. Sí. Pero nosotros tenemos otras circunstancias distintas. Por ejemplo, la Argentina en este momento ha hipotecado el conjunto de sus recursos y riquezas naturales como garantía de repago de la nueva deuda externa que está contrayendo el actual gobierno. Este es el contramodelo, el antiparadigma, diría, de lo que debe hacerse. Hemos hipotecado el conjunto sin consulta alguna, ni con los gobiernos de la provincia, ni con el pueblo de la nación, que son los dos titulares jurídicos. Entonces, el modelo el de la votación, el de tener el criterio de sustentabilidad en el uso de los recursos y riquezas naturales, es decir, dejar para las generaciones venideras aquellos que no son susceptibles de reposición, eso forma parte de la buena administración y del sentido de igualación e inclusión que estamos propiciando.
All right, I believe we had a question from Mr. Celso here. And I just want to remind for those even behind the table, if you have a question there, we'll try and get a hand mic to you if you don't have a microphone in front of you. But go ahead, Mr. Celso. Once again, just remind everyone if we can keep the questions as short and brief as possible, and don't forget to highlight who it's directed to. Thank you.
Well, I was trying to think how I could transform my 5 minutes comment into a 1 minute question. So anyway, but
here we go.
I just try to put it as a question for whoever wants to comment on that. I think it's my point. I mean, after these some very moving testimonies, live testimonies, and of course some other very thoughtful observations, I have a question with the title of this whole debate. I think it's a misnomer to say that there is a battle between equality and freedom. That is a falsehood that was established by the interests precisely of neoliberalism. And what you have, I don't conceive equality without freedom, and I don't concede freedom without equality. And for many reasons which I cannot explain in 1 minute, and that has, of course, class dimensions, race dimensions, gender dimensions, and international dimensions. So I would just hope to hear from any of you if you believe that it's possible to reconcile equality and freedom, and if the name of that would be some sort of democratic socialism. Thank you.
That's very interesting, because that came up last night, actually, in the discussion, where the question was posed, is it necessary to have, or desirable to have, absolute equality? And I think the inference, the unspoken inference was, by the guest who posed that question was, if we establish absolute equality, are we not, by definition, destroying competition, destroying freedom, destroying initiative? So let's continue to take that discussion forward, and maybe Mr. Marcelo, I mean, you touched in your speech about some of those themes. I'm wondering from a policy analysis how you would respond to that.
Totally agree with Celso. Okay, let's use mine. Thank you. No, this is not working either. Well, I'm totally agree with freedom of speech.
You want to come up to the podium?
Yeah.
Let's try that one.
2 minutes.
All right, we've still got these.
Absolutely agree with you, Celso, about in our perspective, my perspective, you cannot separate liberty and equality. It used to be a philosophical issue, and then Cold War design, political design. Today, we cannot separate them. Liberty needs equality. Other way cannot survive. And equality without liberty is totalitarianism. So I support your point of view. We need to think the future, building a bridge between equality and liberty.
Again, the practical question is, how do we do that in a way in which we're not just giving, this is not my perspective, but since this is a dialogue, let me be the devil's advocate. How do we address that in a way that we're not giving people a free pass into laziness? If we give everybody everything for free and easy, and we give them 25% of the oil share that comes from Alaska.
I didn't the expression absolute equality.
You didn't. I was throwing it in there to make it interesting.
Absolute is the domain of religion. The domain of the politics is the domain of the relatives. So that's please.
So where are the boundaries then of relative? How far are we talking policy-wise? When we talk about relative, what does that mean? I mean, there is, for example, in the US, an affirmative action policy, which has its detractors who are saying, but this has gone too far now. Where are the boundaries of, you know, what we're trying to create as a rational equality and a, okay, go ahead.
Which, by the way, have been very interesting. It has been very interesting to hear each one of you. What I want to know is, today, with the new reality, a new perspective from the youth that is giving away the idea of having cars, you know, they prefer bicycles, they prefer the internet, what's happening in South Africa, the e-reality, minorities. What can change? How can we change politics to address this reality? I mean, traditional politics, the way we elect our representatives and the way they correspond to the electors, just doesn't address this reality anymore. The state, the traditional nation state, does not address our reality. What can be done in practical terms to address the new reality and guarantee a bit more equality, which would, by the way, give a bit more freedom to people?
Yeah, please go ahead, Leah. I think you wanted to address that.
Okay. So thank you for these discussions. I have several thoughts, but I want to react.
Closer to the microphone.
Yeah, it works, I think.
Yes, it is.
Okay. First, my position is that the time of national states is not over, actually. We, first of all, need to make order in our own society to solve these very important issues. And for me, equality and freedom are just brothers. And to make a good compromise, of course, we need solidarity within our society. In Estonia, at least, we see the aim to provide equal opportunities for everyone. And this starts from education. It starts from education, our younger generation. And we are happy that in Estonia, our results of our schools are very good. And we basically keep this principle to have the school education the same for all Estonian young people, not dependent on their health of their families or regional where they live. This is very, very important. Education and equal opportunities as a goal of political people as well. Of course, there are always difficulties with political battle and with political culture, and it's up to political system and political parties to agree on certain principles of political culture, which is not so easy process, of course, because of this tight political battle. Okay, but what I also want to mention, because I have this background, I have lived during communist times in Soviet Union, I have realized what does it mean when the property belongs to the people, as was stated by Soviet constitution. I was Minister of Reforms in Estonia for 2 constitutional governments, making this very hard transition to market economy, to liberal society. And I should say that also there is no freedom without protection of ownership rights in society. This is very, very basic for the freedom. And this was the ideology of our reform process in Estonia, to make legal ownership valid, to restore property rights, and to divide this Soviet property so that every person in Estonia, citizen or non-citizen, should have own property, to make their own small economic decision, to free society from this Soviet type where you have one stone society, to make it free people who can make their individual decisions. So, thank you.
Thank you. Emad, you wanted to weigh in on this?
Right. Just very quickly, just a brief clarification about the issue of what we mean by equality here, because I also initially had the same problem of the dichotomy, because I always see the dichotomy between freedom and security, not actually freedom and equality. However, I think what is meant by equality here is improving the socioeconomic conditions of the average citizen in relation to others at all levels. That's what we mean by equality here. Now, where is the dichotomy here? If I take, for example, I come from Egypt. If I take Egypt an example, if you look at the institutions of neoliberalism, IMF, for example, it always donated loans and grants and financial credits and so on to authoritarian governments, the Mubarak's, Ben Ali, and other regimes, and now Sisi. And when Egypt had for 1 year the only elected democratic government, it withheld its donations and its grants and its assistantship. It refused deliberately to give Egypt a clean bill of health economically, so Egypt can acquire more credits and more loans and so on. Once that democratically freely elected government, despite the shortcomings of that government, was gone, actually the donations and the money started to pour in. So that's where the dichotomy is. I think, if you would like to, right.
Me gustaría aclarar que cuando hablamos de la propiedad pública, no es para tirar abajo la propiedad privada personal, al contrario, es para que haya más personas que tengan propiedad privada personal. Si no logramos esta función de igualación, la propiedad va a ser de las compañías multinacionales. Esta es la que nos preocupa. La propiedad privada personal debe ser sostenida como una expresión de igualdad y de libertad del ser humano y de condición de vida digna, pero no puede haber una contraposición entre eso y la obtención de un mecanismo de tutela de recursos y riquezas naturales y del producido de esos recursos y riquezas naturales, porque en ello va también la posibilidad de la propiedad privada de cada individuo, de modo que no lo veamos como una contraposición, sino como una superación de la situación actual, a menos que queramos seguir apostando a la desigualdad creciente, a que la apropiación sea cada vez más destructiva y que en definitiva hagamos estallar el planeta en función de un extractivismo puro en lugar de los criterios de sustentabilidad y de custodia del medio ambiente que son innatos, me parece, a esta concepción y paradigma que estamos propiciando.
Okay, I think we had a question. Oh, okay. Can we give the lady a chance to ask a question? There was a gentleman somewhere. Okay, all right, we've got a lot of hands now, so let's give the lady, they say ladies first, and then we'll come to the gentleman with his permission in the front row there next, okay? Go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Ayobe. I'm a legal practitioner based in Lagos, Nigeria. And the three ladies on this panel gave three different aspects, very different and interesting aspects of a similar problem. And that is the issue of citizenship. And it particularly resonated with regard to the example from Estonia, where after 50 years of Soviet totalitarian rule, the certain rules were brought in about citizenship and whether, and I would be interested to know, you talked about the right by descent or jus sanguinis, and you also talked about people becoming citizens, and I wasn't quite clear how they became citizens, so I wanted to ask about that. And then on the other hand, we had South Africa, where the period, if one could say, of occupation, because during the period of occupation by the Soviet Union, many Russians came into Estonia, whereas in South Africa, the period of occupation was much longer, and it seems as though it was not a matter of you can only be a citizen if you were there before the occupation, so to speak, started. And I find myself wondering whether there were any tests, as you had tests for, whether you had tests for loyalty or what you had to do to become a citizen in Estonia compared to what made you a citizen in South Africa after majority rule was, or at least I should say after apartheid ended. And, you know, considering the situation with regard, although you're not a citizen of Israel, it still faces, Natasha, I should say, you're not a citizen of Israel, but Israel is also, it seems to me, battling with the same issue. Do we allow simple numbers? Do we require people, is it just certain people are allowed to become citizens by virtue of descent? Others, not so much. And I find it, I thought it was very interesting that the three of you had these different aspects.
I think the question is clear. It's basically what qualifies you for citizenship in each of your respective countries, with the exception of Natasha, of course. We're asking you for your perspective and where you stand, perhaps, on the issue of citizenship in Israel. So let me not waste any more time. And let's get that kicked off. I know you want to have a comment afterwards, and then we'll take the question from the gentleman who's been waiting patiently. Yes. Thank you.
Okay. In Estonia, those people who had no connection with the Republic of Estonia, as it was before Second World War, have a naturalization process. They need to apply for citizenship, and they need to know at least some level of Estonian language as well. It was hard political decision, but our perception was that to have a stable country, you need to have some basic loyalty, basic agreement within your citizenry that this country is ours, that this state is ours. Without that, you will have permanent conflicts within your country. So, and the Russian people, of course, for them it was quite difficult to make their like a choice because they had different opinion during Soviet period. It was all Soviet Union.
But Leah, how do you, in a practical policy way, how do you establish that somebody, how does somebody prove that this state is mine and I feel some attachment to it?
People apply for citizenship. It's a personal decision. Part of Estonian residents are Russian citizens because they prefer to stay in touch with Russia. So this is a personal choice. Nobody is forced. But of course, today the situation is that those people who have not made their choice, they have some preferences to travel freely to Russia and to travel freely also within European Union. So they are not motivated strongly to choose a citizenship. This is our issue. And we try to convince those people that they should make their choice. We have free Estonian courses of language to allow everyone to learn our language. And you may think why Estonian language is so important that people should know it, but it's very important to have some kind of common language in your society to understand each other. This is a long process, difficult process, but to keep your country running, you need to create a citizenry which is this basic loyalty towards your country.
So distilling that, Leah, are we basically saying that now if somebody wanted to apply for Estonian citizenship, obviously they need to know the language, they need to apply for it, but assumedly there is also some requirement in terms of how long they've lived, or their parents have lived, or the generations have lived. Has any of that seems to be along the lines of what traditional citizenship constitutes. Is any of that changing in the e-citizenship era that we're allegedly in?
Okay, in a sense, not dependent on citizenship, we are all e-citizens, e-residents. Even we widen the circle of people who can apply for e-residence in Estonia. We have now people around the world who have applied e-residence of Estonia to have opportunities to live a digital life. We live in Estonia, to sign documents digitally, to open companies digitally registered in Estonia. So the citizenship as a political affiliation is not what is dominant in Estonian society anymore. We are network society. We work together across this political citizenship limits.
Okay, let's move the discussion along. Who wants to? Cheryl, do you want to have a go, or Natasha?
I'll go after.
Okay.
The South African citizenship is actually quite simple, and we've learned with a lot of the changes that's been brought about. Just bring it back to the basics. So you born there, you can claim it from descent, although it's difficult to explain how. So you'd have to apply. If for whatever reason your parents are South African, but you end up living somewhere else, you weren't brought up by them. So I'm quite, we didn't go for any complexities. No one is expected to do tests of loyalty or language. I think you're just expected to obey the laws in the country. Language, we have officially 11 languages in our country. 11 official languages, they're all treated equally, although English by and far is probably the language of engagement, which in and of itself has huge disadvantages because most people actually don't have English as a first language, but I think everybody accepts it's a common one. I think questions of religion and language, I think there's a far more conscious effort to in fact be inclusive. One trick we do have is that there still is an underlying racism about, and it plays itself out around xenophobia, where in applications for citizenship, if you're white and you, for example, come from somewhere in Europe, whatever, Estonia, Russian, anything that's blonde and blue eyes or whatever, your chances, there's an underlying racism, your chances of getting absorbed is just a lot higher. Because there are not just the legal requirements, I think there are a lot of social and class issues at play in terms of how, if you're poor and you've walked from the Congo.
Cheryl, are you talking specifically about South Africa?
I'm talking about South Africa today.
Really? So if you're blonde-haired, blue-eyed, that helps your chances of gaining citizenship with all factors being equal?
I shouldn't say that. I should just say that to get the paperwork for yourself into place, to do that. So I'm saying the law is very simple. And I think quite progressive. South Africa has the largest number of refugees in the world of any country. I mean, we really do. Largely from Africa, largely poor, and often repressed, but often economic refugees. We have quite a progressive set of things for how, for example, Zimbabweans have been, pardoned, who have entered the country legally 3 times so far. But I'm just saying, if you come from a European country, your systems of applying is much more sophisticated. You can go online, you can do a whole lot of stuff. And then there is just still a lot of prejudice that employers have. So if you've worked and you're in a job, it's obviously a lot easier to get that going. So I'm just saying that so the law is very simple and very progressive, and I'm very proud of it. But I think how things play out, how companies who employ you, for example, would be prepared to motivate for you. There is just a lot of racism and sexism.
That raises so many questions in my mind, but I don't want to hog the discussion at this point, and we are getting close to lunch, and we all know how important lunch is. So let me move it along to Natasha. Now, we'll try and take it easy on you, Natasha, but this does open up a very big question.
I know, but don't get me responsible.
No hate messages on Facebook.
Not today,
after this
please.
one.
No. Well, I think it's either again, I'm not a citizen of Israel, so I only learned about it. But I think I know a little bit about it, and it's both the easiest and the most difficult way to obtain Israeli citizenship. If you're Jewish, you can. And that's, again, part of the whole problem. It's called the right of return. Or the law of return, it's called. So you have to prove you're Jewish, I suppose, either by giving your birth sign or from a rabbi or your parents' marriage. And actually you get benefits if you go. So there's a whole program from the Jewish Agency, and they'll try to make you motivated. You'll get a discount on education and stuff like that. Actually, it's really strange because when I was younger, they used to, I think they still do it, but they used to have some kind of government/American funded trips to Israel, 10 days for free for Jewish youth, and you see how great it is, and I think a lot of people stay. So that's the one side, if you can pay it, by the way, because it's quite expensive living there. And on the other side, of course, there are also, I think most people come from Europe, America, Morocco also originally, and also from Ethiopia now and Russia. But yeah, those people are thought to be Jewish or some kind of Jewish. And then at the other side, of course, you also have Israeli Arabs, they're called, and they're actually Palestinians who stayed in between inside the borders, and officially they have all the rights and they can do anything anyone else do, but I guess, well, but I will keep it to there, and yeah, so that's within the borders of Israel, to put it that way.
Sami?
I guess we should have called the title Demographics versus Equality.
No,
I think that's
no.
Okay.
Sami?
We have a bunch of questions, and it's almost lunchtime.
Can I just follow that 1 second, please?
Please, if we could, I'll give you a second, if I may, but the gentleman has been waiting patiently. Maybe we'll take a bunch of questions. How about we do it like that? Could we start with the gentleman? And then we'll come to you, sir, next, and then we'll take a question from Tembiza, who also... And what we'll do is, could I ask you to go ahead? We'll take 3 questions. Okay, yes, the gentleman there instead. Could you please keep your questions to questions and short so we can squeeze them in and get an answer? Please, if we can give the gentleman first, because I promised him. Let me keep my word, with your permission. Go ahead, and please, brief and to a question, then we'll come to you, sir.
Gracias, muy buenas tardes a todos. Mi pregunta es una pregunta integrada que tiene que ver con el mismo título de este foro, y es los límites de la inequality, ¿no? Encontrando, si podemos definir que esto tuviera que ver vinculado con el tiempo y la acción, siendo esto la indiferencia. No quiero ser o sonar frío entendiendo todas las historias que desde ayer se han venido plasmando, pero entender cuál es esta búsqueda. Y tú empezabas hoy la plática, Sami, señalando que quizá un estómago lleno te daría una tranquilidad. Y efectivamente eso es lo que yo preguntaría aquí al panel. Una de las preguntas es, esta equidad o igualdad que se está buscando, habría que priorizar entendiendo si primero tiene que ser el acceso a agua potable, y de ahí a disminuir la desnutrición. Esto me llevaría, si se comparte o no, porque datos importantes es, fuera de todo esto que estamos viendo...
Conciso, por favor, please.
Sí, nada más para entender que es ejemplificar que es el positivo, hacia dónde voy, entendiendo si es como un ejemplo de lo que se está viendo en Estonia hoy, siendo un ejemplo en innovación, que la pregunta va en ese sentido también. Si lo que también tenemos que invertir es en innovación tecnológica para que se convierta en este habilitador que nos lleve a poder lograr esta igualdad, entendiendo si la innovación y esta inversión se ve vinculada.
That's a good, clear question. Could technology and innovation perhaps be a bridge to greater equality? That's one question. Go ahead, sir. Please brief as well.
Just an observation, not to leave unchallenged what has been said here. Estonia obviously has its sovereignty. Every nation has its sovereignty to decide its laws and so on. But sometimes the question of language is a front for ethnicity and racism and other problems. In Canada, Canada was built by people who spoke not a word of English, not a word of French, even though the two remain official languages. In the schoolyards of Toronto, 168 languages are spoken. And all of those people are no less Canadian than those who speak only English or French. The state has every right to have its own language, but to impose that on citizenship as a requirement is a false proposition, and in fact is the root cause of many of the problems in the world today, especially in Europe. I originally came from India. There are 28 official languages, and I'm with Cheryl. You know, Africa has so many languages and so on. To associate that with citizenship is a false proposition and should not be left unchallenged. And I suppose John would have something to say about that as well.
Okay, so the second question, let's phrase it in a question, is how can we get around language being used as a tool for discrimination and inequality rather than simply a qualifier of citizenship? So 2 questions so far. I'll recap them at the end. Go ahead, John, if we can keep it also beautifully
so just
short and sweet.
And I would add on to that in a slightly different way, which is I thought we started out very, very well, and great things have been said all along, but we slightly went off track. And I think the reason we go off track is because we're really stuck on terminology and the meaning of terminology, which frankly, this is our 4th session, are so European dominated. So the use of the word equality is straight out of the 18th century in Europe, the way it's being used here. And we're not being conscious of that. I mean, and I thought that Marcelo, as a good Mexican, started us off in the right track because he actually was very big. He was really talking about how do you create the conditions of egalitarianism, the possibility of an egalitarian society, as opposed to a European-defined ideological view that everybody must be equal in some abstract theoretical way, as opposed to in some real way. And we lost that in the conversation. That idea that, well, how do you start? Well, first, I'm sorry, ma'am, it's Cheryl, yes? You know, corruption defeats totally the possibility of egalitarianism and effective government. The absence of public schooling defeats the possibility. There's a list of programs that have to be put in place, and Marcelo gave a couple of examples which change radically what can happen in society. And you know, that is partly European, but frankly, it's not European in its base. And so we have to really watch that we're not being sucked back into the prison of the rational movement, which defines Europe as the center of all thought.
Okay, beautiful. That brings us to a nice, back to the topic move there, very, very nicely done. And it also brings us to Marcelo, who you did have something to say. So let's start with the last question. Let's frame it as a question. How does one differentiate and keep focused on egalitarianism rather than getting lost in some kind of theoretical European absolutism of equality? And then we'll take the other 2 questions.
Yo diría que es exactamente en lo que estamos. Tenemos que hacer un gran cambio cultural que va hacia cómo podemos organizar una sociedad que siga siendo una comunidad o que lo llegue a ser en el futuro inmediato, y para eso tienes que hacer una sociedad igualitaria, lo más igualitaria que puedas. Es la única posibilidad. Yo pensaba como jefe de gobierno, si tengo 9 millones de personas más 4,5 millones de personas luchando por todo, por espacio, por agua, por trabajo, por un lugar en el metro, por una vivienda, ¿cómo vamos a organizar una comunidad? Es más, ¿qué nos es común? La lengua, los valores, las aspiraciones. ¿Qué es lo que nos hace ser una comunidad? Nunca habíamos tenido tantas personas en un espacio tan pequeño, con tantas aspiraciones y al mismo tiempo tanta soledad e incomprensión mutua. Entonces, si construyes una sociedad más igualitaria, puedes aspirar a tener una comunidad. Caso contrario, no se puede. Yo estoy de acuerdo con lo que aquí se ha dicho, no es la igualdad absoluta, sino es construir una sociedad igualitaria. Y construir esa sociedad igualitaria implica necesariamente libertades y derechos. Voy a otra de las preguntas, muy breve. Decía, ¿qué papel debe tener la innovación? Hoy en día, creo que el papel de la innovación será estratégico, central, para cualquier cosa que queramos organizar, porque el gobierno y el poder se está también recreando. Aline preguntó hace un momento, ¿cuáles son las nuevas formas del poder? Entonces, vamos a seguir teniendo elecciones, pero el gobierno es mucho más complejo de lo que era, y el potencial es muy grande, pero todavía no sabemos qué edificio va a ser. Entonces, hagamos una sociedad más igualitaria, seamos muy innovadores, porque si no somos innovadores esto no va a tener una salida, y asumamos que estamos en una gran batalla cultural. Solo termino con una reflexión. Un gran filósofo español decía, Ortega y Gasset, la política no puede estar subordinada a la ética común. Hace 100 años. Y hoy lo que vemos es una revuelta en todo el mundo que dice la política y el poder va a tener que ser subordinada a una ética distinta, que es una ética más democrática y que es la ética común. Entonces hay una gran revuelta en curso y un nuevo edificio político que todavía hoy no sabemos a dónde va a llegar. Tenemos que ser innovadores y tenemos que construir una sociedad más igualitaria y tenemos que abandonar el conservadurismo que lleva al cinismo. Gracias.
Wonderful. Okay. Let me just give a chance if any members of the panel are here or our commentators. Have we lost me now? Okay. This is where my TV voice might come in handy then. If anyone wants to have a final comment from our commentators or panelists before we wrap this up for lunch. And Cheryl, did you want to have a go, or were you just testing your mic as well?
No. Maybe I just want to say that the good thing about South Africa gaining its freedom so late is we've learnt a lot, and it's at a modern time. So our constitution, quite central to it, is a Bill of Rights, which in fact is considered, it's in fact the most important part of our constitution. To change the general constitution, you need 2/3 majority. To change the Bill of Rights, you need 70%. So it's quite difficult to change. And that Bill of Rights says your right to housing, your right to education, your right to water. And what we've seen over the past few years is through the constitutional courts, those rights have become justiciable. The government's obligations to supply people in a dilapidated building with housing before they can be evicted is now the law. The right of people to have water and food, those have been proven by the Constitutional Court. So these can now be enforced, and it's become the norm before government tries to do anything of that sort. So I think modernization of our mineral rights, for example, took a huge fight to in fact assert the right that in fact the minerals belong to the people. And so therefore we've got a whole new mining bill, still contested and abused in the contestation by some corrupt politicians, who in fact using the space where it's being contested for their own ends as well. But so I think we've done a lot of stuff to just simplify the law. And then I want to say the last thing, I think we should look at things like WTO, the UN Security Council. I mean, it's just so outdated, to put it mildly. And I think the question of governance, as Marcelo says, Robert Mugabe learned very early on, your control over information used to be an important government power. You no longer have. The Arab Spring. But I think the people in the Arab Spring also learned that you cannot run a revolution on WhatsApp. Quite frankly, you have to get back to grassroots organization. That's what we're learning in the ANC. We are now going back to reclaim those branches. It's the only way we're going to get a decent government, is if we go back and become branch members of the ANC, we become active in the women's movement. We've got a trade union movement that was decimated by the political shenanigans. We are now going back to rebuild a strong, progressive trade union movement, because it's the only way women workers are going to be protected. It's the only way that workers from neighboring countries are going to be protected. So I think modernization of our laws and our constitutions and the justiciability. So I want to conclude by saying the rule of law needs to be re-simplified to what it is meant to be. And I don't think these are bourgeois notions. I think they've been bastardized over decades. And I think we must get back to the simplicity of those elements of freedom, equality, and solidarity.
Thank you very much. What a beautiful note to end on there then. When I say end, this is of course only a lunch break. Let's extend a very warm hand of applause for our panelists and commentators here for their contributions to today's panel. I'd like to extend a hand as well to all of you who have participated with questions. I know there are many more. Forgive us for not being able to take those questions in, but it's now overtime into lunch. However, the good news is the show goes on, as they say in television, so we'll have the pleasure of the company of our distinguished panelists here during the lunch and afterwards. So feel free to avail yourself of the opportunity to approach them. They're very approachable. None of them bite. We can continue this sort of conversation. So, bon appetit, and we'll see you back in this room at 2 o'clock for lunch. Thank you.
Excuse me, may I just say something very quickly? I mean, we who are sitting here on this side, we might need to change places for the second session because the speakers will come here. So your personal belongings, just in order that you here, you will move basically from one side to another. Thank you.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I trust lunch was as much of a delight as this morning's session. And let's hope we can keep the good times rolling with an even more pleasurable, sweet ending to today's deliberations with the second session. Now, this session is entitled Beyond Entrepreneurship, Real Alternatives to the Labour Society. And just to run you through once again what we're going to do, we will be hearing from a distinguished panel to my left here, to your screen right. Each of the speakers will address us for 10 to 12 minutes, and once again I'll be attempting to help them with time management by giving them cards to let them know how they're going, so they won't be surprised by the end of those 12 minutes. Following that, we will hear from two commentators. We're delighted to have them up here again, and there will be an opportunity for audience comments and questions. And the organizers pointed out to me that we may include comments as well as questions, but as long as they are brief. So we'll try and get as much of your thoughts in towards the end of this session. And at the end, hopefully, we'll come back to our commentators here for a few brief final words, the last word.